In the late 1970s, the nation of India stood on the cusp of change. It was a time of transition where the old world met the new and the hopes of millions hung in the balance. The streets of New Delhi buzzed with the energy of a nation finding its way, but it felt much like a pressure cooker ready to explode at any moment. In the nation's capital, the streets were filled with the echoes of discontent, protests, strikes, and a general sense of unease. Just a few years earlier, former Prime Minister Indira Gandhi had imposed a state of emergency, a 21-month period from 1975 to 1977 that griped the country in a vice, choking out civil liberties and sowing seeds of distrust that would linger long after its end. During this period, opposition leaders were jailed, the press was silenced, and the judiciary was pressured to comply with the government. The state was ruled by decree, and basic freedoms like assembly and expression were banned. In other words, the government had unchecked power. Though Gandhi's government claimed that the decision was necessary to address national security threats and restore order, many saw it as an attack on the core principles of India's democracy. Families feared the ominous late-night knocks at their doors, knowing that the police armed with unchecked authority could detain anyone they deemed a threat. The scars of this period ran deep, with memories of those dark days continuing to haunt the nation. When the emergency ended in 1977, with the Janata Party's election victory, it brought renewed hope for a fresh start in India. However, that optimism was soon shattered. The new government, which many believed would heal the nation, instead found itself embroiled in controversy. The party would eventually lose the next election, but their downfall wasn't due to their governance alone. Another major contributing factor was their poor handling of a horrific crime that captivated the entire nation. Two men, Kuljit Singh and Jasbir Singh, also known as Ranga and Billa, were some of the worst predators the nation had ever seen. In the year 1978, they abducted two innocent siblings named Geeta and Sanjay Chopra in a crime so brutal that it would forever scar the nation's conscience. The cruelty they had unleashed upon these young lives shocked the country to its core, turning the public's hopes for justice into a rallying cry against the system that had failed to protect its most vulnerable. This was one of the most horrific chapters in India's modern history, unfolding amidst an already turbulent political era. And as if the brutality of their crime wasn't enough, the torment continued as they were perilously close to evading justice. In 1978, Geeta and Sanjay were the very soul of the Chopra family, two lively, gifted children who had bright futures ahead of them. Both siblings attended some of the most prestigious schools in New Delhi, where they consistently excelled. Geeta, at just 16 years old, was a second-year student at Jesus and Mary College, where she stood out not only for her academic brilliance, but also for her vibrant personality and artistic flair. Her warmth and kindness made her a beloved figure among both her peers and teachers, who admired her for her creativity and the genuine care she showed to those around her. Younger brother Sanjay was equally remarkable. At only 14 years old, he was already making his mark as a 10th standard student at Modern School, another prestigious institution in the city. Sanjay was known for his sharp intellect and determination, qualities that set him apart as a promising young man with a bright future ahead of him. The Chopra siblings were not just exceptional students, they were the pride of their family, embodying hope, joy, and the promise of what the next generation could achieve. Together, the family of four resided in the officers' enclave in Dalla Khan, a tranquil neighborhood in New Delhi. At the head of the family was Captain Madan Mohan Chopra, a distinguished officer in the Indian Navy and a man of integrity and discipline. He was a man who lived by a strong moral code, and he ensured that these principles were instilled in his children. Together with his wife, he nurtured in them a profound sense of responsibility, a deep respect for education, and an enduring love for their country. According to records, the bond between the siblings was incredibly strong, with Sanjay holding deep admiration for his older sister Geeta. Their connection was evident in everything they did, from collaborating on school projects to enjoying family outings. But perhaps the one thing they had the most in common was their shared love for music and radio. They shared countless moments together listening to their favorite tunes and eagerly following various radio programs. Among the shows they cherished, there was one that stood out above the rest, a show named Yuva Vani by All India Radio. This popular program was more than just entertainment, it was a voice for the youth of India, tackling issues that resonated deeply with the younger folks, such as generational conflicts, career paths, and personal growth. It was also a platform where young individuals could express themselves and be heard by a nationwide audience. Since Geeta and Sanjay were both outstanding students and active participants in their communities, they likely caught the attention of the program's producers. Their academic achievements combined with their passion for radio and music made them ideal candidates to contribute to a discussion that would inspire and engage listeners of their generation. And as a result, they were invited to be featured guests on the radio talk show, a recognition not only of their talents, but also of their potential to influence and uplift the youth of the nation. For Geeta and Sanjay, being invited to participate in the program was more than just an exciting opportunity. It was a chance to be part of something they were passionate about and to share their perspectives with the world. As parents, Mr. and Mrs. Chopra would have been filled with immense pride and joy at seeing their children recognized in such a meaningful way. Yet in the cruel twist of fate that was about to unfold, this moment of pride would be replaced by unimaginable sorrow. In a matter of days, one parent would be inconsolable and the other would collapse in grief. On August 26, 1978, the Chopra household buzzed with excitement as Geeta and Sanjay eagerly prepared for their appearance on the radio program at All India Radio. As they left their home around 6:15 p.m., they were met with an overcast sky with a light drizzle beginning to fall. Their plan for the evening was straightforward: head to the radio office to attend the program talk for an hour and a half, and their father would pick them up afterward at 9 p.m. As they continued toward the office, the drizzle intensified and the streets of New Delhi began to darken. But just as they approached a roundabout, a car horn suddenly caught their attention. A man named Nanda offered them a ride, and the two children gratefully accepted his kind gesture. But whether Nanda was a friend of their father or simply an acquaintance, the records don't specify. However, it's reasonable to assume that the children knew him. They were more than sensible enough not to accept rides from complete strangers. A few minutes later, Nanda dropped them off not at the radio station, but at the Gold Dak Khana roundabout at 6:30 p.m. located in the heart of New Delhi. Gold Dak Khana is centered around a historic traffic roundabout with a 12-sided market at its core, one of the city's oldest colonial-era landmarks. As Geeta and Sanjay stepped out of the car, they found themselves amidst the lively hum of this iconic spot where the remnants of the colonial past blend seamlessly with the energy of modern Delhi. Then they continued on foot towards the radio station, enjoying each other's company in the cool evening air. On the same day that the Chopra siblings were attending the radio program, two men named Ranga and Billa were driving around the neighborhoods of New Delhi. But these were no ordinary men. They were hardened criminals who had long existed on the fringes of society, each with a past steeped in violence and crime. Ranga, whose real name was Kiljit Singh, was once a truck driver who later turned to taxi driving. He had carved out a notorious reputation as a ruthless and cunning figure in the criminal underworld. His early forays into crime were modest petty thefts and minor scams, but as time passed, his activities became increasingly bold and dangerous. Ranga was a master manipulator skilled at exploiting the system to his advantage. He knew how to use bribery, intimidation, and the inefficiencies of law enforcement to evade capture and escape serious consequences, slipping through the cracks time and again. Billa, whose real name was Jaspar Singh, was a different kind of criminal, a notorious car thief. With a violent streak, Billa didn't just flirt with crime, he fully embraced it from the beginning. Together they were a dangerous duo motivated by greed and the desire for easy money. They drifted from city to city, staying just ahead of the law, leaving a trail of victims wherever they went. But on the fateful day of August 26, 1978, Ranga and Billa found themselves in a car driving around New Delhi, desperate and low on funds. Both had recently been released from Arthur Road Jail, but their criminal pasts had made it increasingly difficult to stay under the radar. They needed a big score to secure their future, so on that day, they decided to escalate their crimes beyond petty thefts. Something far more audacious and dangerous. They had a plan to kidnap the children of one of India's wealthiest families, hoping to demand a ransom that would set them up for life. At around 6:35 p.m., as Geeta and Sanjay walked near the market, a mustard-colored Fiat car with the registration number HRK8930 slowed down beside them. In the car were two men, Ranga and Billa. Earlier, Ranga and Billa had noticed two well-dressed teenagers walking along the main street. To them, Geeta and Sanjay seemed like ideal targets, likely the children of a wealthy family, unprotected and seemingly vulnerable. With a quick exchange of glances, the decision was made. Pulling alongside the siblings, one of the men called out, offering them a ride to the station to avoid the rain. Relieved by the gesture, Geeta and Sanjay accepted the offer. At first, the situation seemed like a stroke of luck, an easy way to avoid the worsening weather and reach their destination on time. Sanjay, ever trusting, felt comforted by the gesture, while Geeta, more cautious, likely hesitated for a moment. Perhaps her mind was flashing through the warnings she had heard countless times. Geeta, you must never accept rides from strangers or people you don't know. However, with the rain falling steadily and the urgency of reaching their destination on time, she pushed the thought aside, convincing herself that this was just a harmless gesture of kindness. Additionally, she knew that taking the ride was the quickest way to avoid being late for their debut on the show. Something they didn't want to risk. Geeta knew the route to the office well, but something about the situation made her uneasy. However, the men appeared friendly enough and the car was heading in the right direction, so she set aside her doubts and climbed in with her brother. As the Fiat merged into traffic, the familiar sights of New Delhi passed by a blur. The siblings exchanged a few words, their initial hesitation fading as they settled into the ride. But that sense of relief was short-lived. Geeta quickly noticed that the car was veering off the usual route. Alarmed, she voiced her concerns, questioning the driver about the sudden change in direction. But Ranga and Billa, sensing her growing suspicion, responded with a cold threat. One of them immediately brandished a kapin, a ceremonial dagger carried by some Sikhs. The glint of the blade stuck against the dim interior of the car. Now the atmosphere inside the Fiat had shifted abruptly from uneasy to terrifying. For Geeta and Sanjay, the ride that was supposed to be a simple, helpful gesture had turned into their worst fears, and they were helpless. Realizing the danger they were in, Geeta and Sanjay started screaming and shouting for help. Alarmed by the potential of being seen or heard, Ranga pressed down hard on the gas, speeding up the car in a desperate attempt to escape attention. But the situation quickly escalated. Without warning, Sanjay, driven by sheer fear and instinct, lunged at Ranga, catching him off guard. In the scuffle, the kirpan slipped from Ranga's grasp, cutting his thumb, and blood began to flow. Geeta, refusing to succumb to terror, joined her brother in the struggle, attacking both Ranga and Billa. The screams and shouting soon drew the attention of several people in the street. But the speeding car soon vanished from sight, leaving behind only a fleeting sense of something gone terribly wrong. As the car sped past the market and onto the open road, the siblings' struggle came to an abrupt halt, silenced by the menacing blade pointed directly at them. Forced into the back seat, they sat paralyzed with fear, their minds racing with thoughts of escape, but their bodies frozen by the imminent threat of violence. Up front, Ranga and Billa panted heavily, trying to catch their breath after the chaotic scuffle. Now that they were on the open road, far from the bustling market and the prying eyes of bystanders, they might have even felt a wave of relief wash over them. The danger seemed to have passed, and they believed they could finally carry out their sinister plan without further interruption. What they didn't realize, however, was that they were not entirely alone. Behind them, a man on a scooter had been following since they left the market, his curiosity piqued by the earlier commotion. Nevertheless, the car sped along the roads of Delhi, eventually coming to a stop at a public park approximately 7 kilometers from where the siblings had been picked up near the market. Inside the vehicle, the tension mounted as Ranga and Billa began questioning the children about their parents, eager to determine how much ransom they could demand. In response, Geeta and Sanjay, their voices tinged with fear, revealed that their father was a naval officer. But this revelation didn't provoke the concern one might expect. Ranga and Billa weren't worried about the consequences of kidnapping the children of a military man. Instead, it sparked a different kind of anxiety. Their plan had hinged on targeting the children of wealthy families, and they knew that a naval officer's salary wouldn't yield the substantial ransom they had hoped for. Ranga, sensing the futility of their actions, quietly suggested to Billa that they should let the kids go. After all, their father probably didn't have the kind of money they were after. But Billa, ice cold and calculating, dismissed the idea outright. He had something else in mind, something darker and more sinister than just a simple tantrum. As the clock neared 8 p.m. on August 26, 1978, the Chopra household was alive with anticipation. The family gathered around their radio, the centerpiece of their evening routine, in a time when television was still a luxury for many and visual entertainment was a rare treat. Mr. and Mrs. Chopra settled in, their hearts filled with pride and excitement as they tuned the dial to the All India radio channel. The thought of hearing their children's voices broadcast across the airwaves filled them with joy. And now they eagerly awaited that special moment when the familiar tones of Geeta and Sanjay would come through the speakers. A few minutes past 8 p.m., the familiar crackle of the radio filled the room as the hosts began their introductions, but instead of the voices of G and Sanjay, the names of 2 other guests were announced, names that were unfamiliar to Mr. and Mrs. Chopra. Confusion settled over the room, and the Chopras exchanged puzzled glances. Maybe they had simply tuned into the wrong station, or perhaps there had been some unexpected change in the program. But as they adjusted the dial again and waited for any sign of their children's voices, an unsettling thought began to creep into their mind. If Geeta and Sanjay weren't on the air as they had planned, then where could they be? It was now close to 8:30 p.m., and Mr. Chopra felt in knowing dread take hold. Unable to bear the growing unease, he quickly mounted his scooter and tore through the darkened streets of New Delhi, his heart pounding with every twist and turn as he raced toward the All India radio office. When he finally arrived, the sight that greeted him confirmed his worst fears. His children had never reached the station. Desperately clinging to hope, he immediately called home, praying for some relief. But his heart sank further when his wife answered, confirming that G and Sanjay had not returned home either. With no time to lose, Mr. Chopra hurried back to his house, his mind racing with unanswered questions. Once home, he frantically picked up the phone again, reaching out to relatives and close friends, asking if the children had perhaps found their way to someone they knew. But with each call, the answers were the same. No one had seen or heard anything from the 2 teenagers. This unsettling realization left him with no other choice. Driven by mounting fear, he rushed to the nearest police station to do something every parent dreads: to report his children missing. By 10:15 p.m., with no other leads, Mr. Chopra set out on a frantic search, visiting every place where the children might have gone. He combed through familiar spots, hoping against hope for some sign of them, but each stop only deepened his despair. Eventually, he returned home empty-handed and burdened with an overwhelming sense of dread. As the night wore on, the reality of the situation became more terrifying. Mr. and Mrs. Chopra were well aware that the city's streets could be unpredictable, especially after dark. But they also knew that their children were resourceful and smart, capable of looking after themselves in most situations. However, the harsh reality of the city's rampant crime made it impossible to ignore the knowing fear that something terrible might have happened. With nothing they could do but wait, the Chopras clung to the faint hope that the police would find their children and bring them home safely. It was now the 28th of August 1978, 2 days after the disappearance of the siblings. On the outskirts of the Delhi Ridge, a dense and sprawling forested area in New Delhi, a local cowherd named Donny Ram was tending to his small herd. This was a daily routine for him, guiding his cattle along the well-worn paths to find the best grazing spots. Usually the familiar sounds and sights of the forest would bring a sense of calm. But on this particular day, something felt different. Donnie Ram noticed that his usually docile cows were behaving strangely. They were all pulling away from a specific area as if they were reluctant to graze at a certain spot in the field. This unusual behavior puzzled Donnie Ram. As he watched them, a creeping suspicion began to form in his mind. His herd of cows seemed to sense something he couldn't see, something hidden in the tall grass or beneath the trees that was causing them distress. Curious and increasingly uneasy, Donnie Ram moved toward the direction that had unsettled his herd. Brushing aside the thick foliage, he cautiously stepped forward, but what he saw next froze him in place. Lying in the undergrowth were the lifeless bodies of two young teenagers. The scene was horrifying, their small frames twisted unnaturally, their clothes stained with dried blood. Without a moment's hesitation, Donnie Ram bolted toward the nearest road, desperately waving down a passing vehicle. The driver, alarmed by the fear etched on his face, didn't hesitate to offer help. Together they sped off toward the nearest police station. At the station, the officers listened in shock as Dan Ram relayed his horrifying discovery. They quickly dispatched a team of investigators to the scene. As the team approached, they were assaulted by the overwhelming stench of death. Long before the gruesome sight came into view, despite the bodies being in an advanced state of decomposition, forensic experts were able to identify physical traits and injuries that indicated the victims were likely young teenagers. Combing through missing persons reports and focusing their search on children and teenagers, it wasn't long before an investigator came across a report filed just 2 days earlier. The report was made by a man named Madan Mohan Chopra, who had reported his two young children Geeta and Sanjay missing on August 26th. With a growing sense of dread, the officer reached for the phone and dialed the number of the Chopra household. The next day at around 3 a.m. in the morning, Mr. and Mrs. Chopra stood motionless at the entrance of the mortuary. For Mr. Chopra, he couldn't be sure, but a sinking feeling in his gut told him that the bodies beneath the sheets might be his children. It was an instinctive fear that no parent should ever have to confront. When the sheet was finally pulled back, the sight that met his eyes hit him with devastating force, as if the very air had been sucked from the room. What we're about to read next is the report by Dr. Barasingh, a surgeon who conducted the post-mortem examination on the dead body of Geeta. Please be aware that some of the details may be disturbing. The body was found in a state of advanced decomposition with bluish discoloration on the face, which had also been partially destroyed by maggots. The abdomen was distended and the superficial skin had peeled away from almost the entire body. Hair from the skull was falling, the eyeballs had liquefied, and the mouth was open. Reading the report, we also found 6 different instances where Dr. Singh had noted that Geeta suffered external injuries. The surgeon began writing each of these injuries with the words "one incised wound," an indication that Geeta had been brutally cut or stabbed in 6 different places. But what we found next was even more horrifying. Sanjay's post-mortem report, while similarly affected by the decomposition process, revealed a far more brutal reality. The list of external injuries on his body was more than 3 times longer than Geeta's. In total, 21 separate wounds were recorded on Sanjay's body, each cut or stab inflicted on a different part of him. As the investigation into the brutal murder of the young children gained momentum, authorities nearly found themselves chasing shadows due to critical errors in police action. As you might remember from the previous episode, there was a crucial witness. In this case, his name was Inderjeet Singh, and he was on his scooter following the car driven by Ranga and Bila as they abducted the children. On the day of the incident, Inderjeet Singh found himself near the Gall market when he was startled by the sound of commotion coming from the car ahead of him. Looking into the window, he saw a girl and a boy in the back struggling with the driver and another man. As he pulled alongside, the boy showed him his bleeding shoulder and waved desperately for help. Inderjeet managed to follow the car through the next few roads, but lost it when it ran a red light. Thankfully, he wasn't the only one who had witnessed the commotion. Another witness, Bhagwan Das, was walking near the market when he heard disturbing noises coming from a yellow Fiat driving by. As he got closer, the horrific scene inside the car came into focus. A young girl, frantic and terrified, was desperately pulling at the driver's hair while a boy beside her fought fiercely with the passenger, the front seat struggling with all his strength. Records show that several witnesses had come forward with alarming reports about what they saw on the evening of August 26th, including Bhagwan Das, who even provided the police with the car's license plate number. However, the police did not treat these complaints with the urgency they deserved. To make matters worse, a clerical error led to a critical mistake that almost derailed the entire investigation. The officer who received Bhagwan Das's tip recorded the wrong license plate number. Yet, despite these setbacks, there was still a glimmer of hope. Recognizing the gravity of the case, the police promptly revisited and corrected the reports based on the testimonies of the witnesses. With this crucial information, they launched an extensive search. But in order to catch the men responsible, they had to first find the car. Fortunately, this didn't take long. On August 31st, 1978, investigators discovered an abandoned car in a park 17 kilometers from the market. The vehicle matched the description they had been searching for. And upon closer inspection, they confirmed it was stolen with several license plates hidden in the trunk. However, what truly marked this as the turning point in the investigation were the contents found inside. Investigators from the Central Forensic Science Laboratory discovered strands of hair and smears of blood that were later confirmed to belong to Geeta and Sanjay Chopra. Additionally, fingerprints were lifted from the scene and cross-referenced against records of ex-criminals. This led to a perfect match, with two notorious ex-convicts, Kuljit Singh, also known as Ranga, and Jasper Singh alias Biller. Armed with his critical evidence, authorities swiftly initiated a nationwide manhunt for the two criminals. Wanted posters featuring the faces of Ranga and Biller were also plastered across every city and town, while their names echoed relentlessly on radio and television broadcasts. However, locating two men in one of the world's most populated nations was a daunting challenge. Yet as fate would have it, justice was about to get a helping hand. Records state that on September 8, 1978, a few days after the manhunt began, the two men boarded a cross-country train as it slowed near the Yamuna River bridge close to Agra. By this time, they had been on the run for 13 days and had even narrowly avoided capture. On one occasion, after Biller sustained a head injury, the pair sought treatment at a hospital using false names and spinning a story about being attacked by thieves. Although the police were suspicious, they escorted the pair to the supposed crime scene only to find no evidence to back up their story. When the men failed to report to the police station the next morning, an officer visited the address they had provided only to discover it was fake. Now aboard the moving train, they likely felt a sense of relief knowing it would carry them far from Delhi and into the suburbs, where their chances of being caught seemed much slimmer. However, they were unaware that the compartment they had entered was reserved exclusively for military personnel. As the train departed and gathered speed, the soldiers surrounding them immediately sensed something was off. One of them approached the two men asking for identification, but in response, the two men reacted with hostility, triggering an altercation. The situation rapidly escalated as the men tried to fight back, but the soldiers, trained and disciplined, quickly subdued them. In the midst of the struggle, one of the soldiers took a closer look at their faces and realized he had seen them before on a wanted poster in a recent newspaper. Recognizing them as the fugitives behind the abduction of the two teenagers, he immediately alerted his superiors. At that moment, Ranga and Biller's days of being on the run came to a dramatic end. Following their arrest, both men were subjected to multiple medical examinations and their belongings were thoroughly searched. The police uncovered a dagger and blood-stained clothing, while doctors noted bruises and wounds on their bodies. Some fresh from the struggle with the soldiers, others older, perhaps inflicted during the kidnapping and murder of the Chopra children. In the days that followed, Ranga and Biller were subjected to intense interrogation, and under the relentless pressure, they eventually cracked. Ranga was the first to confess, admitting how he and Biller had abducted Geeta and Sanjay, taken them to a secluded and brutally murdered them after realizing that securing a substantial ransom was unlikely. Not wanting to be outdone, Billa also confessed, though he attempted to shift more of the blame onto Ranga. However, as the trial approached, both men retracted their statements, claiming they had been coerced under duress and tortured by the police. By 1979, the Ranga and Billa had captivated the entire our nation, culminating in a tense courtroom showdown. Forensic evidence played a pivotal role in linking Ranga and Billa to the crime. But it was only part of the case that the prosecution had meticulously built, equally compelling with the testimonies of several key witnesses, which reinforced the forensic findings and painted a chilling picture of the events. One such witness was a parking attendant stationed near the Budur Janti Park, the site of the horror crime. He testified that on the evening of August 26th, he had charged Ranga and Billa for parking their Fiat and noticed the children sitting in the passenger seat, an observation that would later prove crucial. Another critical witness was the landlord of the apartment near the park where the abandoned Fiat was eventually discovered. He recalled seeing Billa on August 27th with a fresh bandage on his head, a detail that tied him directly to the timeline of events. Then there was the physician from a hospital who had treated Billa on September 4th. The doctor vividly remembered him, particularly because he left without paying for his treatment. Despite Ranga and Billa's desperate attempts to retract their confessions and shift the blame onto each other, the combined weight of the forensic evidence and the consistent witness accounts was insurmountable. By November, the court had heard enough and delivered its final verdict, sending the two men to the gallows. Ranga and Billa were found guilty beyond any reasonable doubt, with the judge even condemning their actions as inhuman and barbaric. Justice was finally at hand, and now they would pay for the crimes they committed against Geeta and Sanjay. Despite their lawyers' efforts to file multiple appeals in an attempt to overturn the death sentence, the courts, including the High Court, remained resolute. The gravity of their crimes was overwhelming, and the evidence against them was indisputable. Even their final plea for clemency to the President of India was rejected. At one point, the Supreme Court remarked that the inhumanity of the two suspects defied all belief and description. In their ruling, the judges underscored that Ranga and Billa deserved the death sentence, stating that any other sentence would amount to a complete failure of justice. On January 31, 1982, for years after the gruesome crime, Ranga and Billa took their steps towards the news. They were hanging, their lives coming to a cold and final end, but in no way did this match the manner in which they had taken the lives of the innocent siblings. In the aftermath of this heartbreaking tragedy, the Geeta and Sanjay Chopra Awards were instituted to honor children who exhibit exceptional bravery in the face of danger. These awards stand as a powerful tribute to the innocent lives that were taken, to soon ensuring that the courage of Geeta and Sanjay continues to inspire and resonate with future generations across India. That's all for today. Thanks for watching.